This video is a summary of my 4 previous videos, which all have the titles that begin with Why I Am Not an Atheist. This video can be watched on its own, but I will leave out some arguments which I made in the previous videos. Please watch those other videos for some of the more specific arguments. In the videos entitled Why I Am Not an Atheist, Truth, I argued that, from the perspective of the materialist, every single thought we have is not based on deductive logic or any other reliable process, but our thoughts are only the results of atomic and electrical interactions in the brain. This includes the materialist's thoughts about materialism. His own thoughts about materialism are not really reliable, but only physically caused, according to his philosophy. I conclude then that materialism is self-refuting, and that our logical abilities point to some standard and source of intelligence that is outside of the physical order. In the video entitled Why I Am Not an Atheist, Goodness, I argue that if nothing beyond the material world exists, then there is no absolute moral standard of right and wrong, good and bad, good and evil. In the materialist perspective, there can be no moral absolute apart from what we as humans invent for ourselves. However, human experience points to a moral absolute, even if we don't really know what it is. Humans have a sense of right and wrong embedded into their nature, and this points to a source and standard of goodness. In the video entitled Why I Am Not an Atheist, Beauty, I argue that in the materialist's philosophy, art has no intrinsic meaning. The beauty we seem to experience means nothing more than the pleasure we get from taking drugs. However, the effect of art throughout the ages, its distinctiveness, and the longing it evokes in the depths of mankind point to some ultimate meaning in art, some standard and source of beauty outside of the physical order and independent of our own minds. So to summarize for the materialists, if nothing beyond the physical world exists, then 1. There is no reliable source of intelligence, just thoughts appearing in our brains from physical interactions. 2. There is no ultimate standard of goodness or moral codes. Our morality is just our subjective conclusion about what we think is good. 3. There is no intrinsic meaning in art. Beauty means nothing more than pleasure. Now the materialist can continue with his everyday life. He can eat his physical breakfast. He can listen to material music and enjoy concrete paintings. He can sleep on his molecular bed. He can accuse men made merely of atoms of physical crimes which he happens to think in his material brain are wrong. He can commend concrete men for spatial and temporal actions which he thinks are heroic. He can even continue to observe the physical world based on the physical interaction in his senses and brain, and he can come to conclusions about patterns in the physical world. But he dare not dream of anything more than that. Nothing beyond this exists for him. He lives in a world of energy and molecules, but nothing more. No real beauty. Art cannot point him beyond himself. No real good and evil. No good reason to curse a rapist or congratulate a hero. No real intelligence. Nothing more than observations of patterns. Only observation, personal preferences, and sensory pleasure. The materialist philosopher simply will not allow for anything more than this. Now the alternative is to embrace the data of human experience. We can admit that intelligence, deductive reasoning, the undeniability of a well-constructed logical proof, and our inherent desire to know truth and to get to the heart of reality all point to a source of logic and intelligence. We can admit that the zeal with which humans condemn murderers, the ingrained sense of right and wrong, the certainty that humans have inalienable rights, the way we love good guys and despise bad guys, the horror with which we regard events like the Holocaust, and the hatred we feel towards injustice, points to a standard and source of goodness. We can admit that the passion and longing evoked by a beautiful song, the agony of the artist trying to express what is inside of him, the emotion evoked by a well-written poem, and the intrinsic value we seem to find in art points to a standard and a source of beauty. What we have from these data are 3 non-physical things: intelligence, goodness, and beauty. From the preceding arguments, we have nothing more than three standards and sources. We do not have a person, we do not have a will, but we do have something, or some things, that is intelligent, good, and beautiful. We have not just a source, but an essence, the spring from which these three things flow. We do not know much about this thing at this point, but we do have something intelligent, good, and beautiful. This intelligent, good, and beautiful thing we can call God. If this God exists, then atheism is not true. There is something more, some source, some entity which gives meaning and fullness to our experience. This human experience and these three things, intelligence, goodness, and beauty, are the reasons I am not an atheist. These three things on their own do not make me a Christian. That is a different argument. But these three things do give me a God, one to which I am subject, and one which I ought to seek with everything that I am. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you have a great day.